Hi, this is John Hawkins Jr. with Gateway Counseling Center, and welcome to our YouTube Tuesday Night Live. We do every Tuesday at 7:15. I think I'm a minute or two late tonight. I had a little technical problem again. One of these days I want to get all that worked out. So we are a counseling center here in Boynton Beach, Florida, where we do individual, couple, family counseling. We work on all mental health, relational issues. We also do issues with spiritual direction. My father's a retired minister, so we do different aspects of that as well. This Tuesday Night Live is a resource to the community, to any questions, information we can provide, questions we can answer, different tips, different things around current research, or what we're learning through like neuroscience and just technology and everything about the brain, the nervous system to help people at a higher level. I myself specialize in working with all types of trauma, PTSD, relationships, addictions, and also performance work. So I work with pro athletes, golfers, some college athletes down here in South Florida, a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, things like that, trying to break through to the next level. So throughout the week, I take questions that get emailed to me. You can reach me at jonh@gatewaycounseling.com. We also have a Facebook page, Gateway Counseling Center, obviously a YouTube channel, Gateway Counseling on Center on YouTube. You can reach me at also, I have a daily blog I do on Facebook. It's at John D. Hawkins Jr. And I respond to any comments or questions on that on a daily basis. Also, if you like some of the things I talk about or get into on Tuesday nights on the YouTube Live, I have a podcast with my partner Paul Adams, and that is called The Key. And you can find that on iTunes, Spotify, and Overcast. You can also go directly to our website, thekeypodcasting.com. That's thekeypodcasting.com, and where you can stream all of our podcasting episodes. You can also, post questions and responses there. So there we get into kind of much more in depth. That usually lasts probably 45 minutes to an hour, where we talk a lot more about the issues I talk about on Tuesday, but just give a lot more depth into the discussion. And Paul's great at asking a lot of lay questions and things, that the average person, it helps me kind of hone down some of the things I say there a little clinically in a way that's like really easy for people to understand. So tonight, some of the questions that came in this week were centered around a lot of trauma-based stuff. And I would tell you that probably that's the biggest issue and things that people come in for. They don't typically come in saying, I have PTSD, or I've been through trauma, or I was molested. They come in and they say, I have panic attacks, I have chronic anxiety, I have anger outburst, I have difficulty trusting people or connecting. And so a lot of what the mental health people like community people like myself will diagnose you with depression or anxiety or panic disorder, agoraphobia, or all these different things, and you end up with 5 or 6 different diagnoses. And I would tell you that the vast majority of it is forms of post-traumatic stress. And so maybe you've heard that term PTSD, but you think of veterans and cops and firemen, and in my experience, that's like 1% of the people with PTSD. The rest of it is people like ourselves who have these symptoms that keep getting diagnosed. Also, this, PTSD has physical manifestations like fibromyalgia or stomach digestive problems or low immunity. And so a lot of things people seek medical attention for years and decades in cases are really trauma-based. And so I want you to understand tonight, I want to talk a little bit about what PTSD is, so you understand like if you might have symptoms of it, or friends or family members, because what happens, like I was saying, is a lot of it gets diagnosed as depression or as anxiety issues, but they're just manifestations of the trauma. So whenever we have overwhelming experience in the face of aloneness or helplessness, we get flooded with these really strong emotions, which are chemical electrical reactions in the body. And then if these chemical electrical reactions that we call emotions, or they can trigger a big adrenaline release, things like that, don't get regulated in kind of in a controlled way, they'll give us damage to our brain. They'll give us nerve damage, cell death. And so the brain has evolved various ways to prevent that from happening. They're actually triggered by nerves in the brains. So the most advanced and evolved is what we call secure attachment. So I'm triggered to reach for somebody in some way, emotionally, physically, to be there for me, to respond to me in a way that helps me deal with this emotional thing or helps me through this circumstance, and then I get to the other side of it and I get to use that energy like in an effective or adaptive way. The next one is fight or flight, and so some of the energy gets discharged fighting or fleeing and serves its purpose. The last is our most primitive defense. Animals can do it, and human beings, what happens is the lower brain releases internal opiates and kind of splits off whatever amount of energy and information in the form of memories, things like that, that we can't handle or regulate, and it goes over here to help us keep functioning. So on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say something kind of comes off a little bit, and we would call it like an unprocessed memory or unprocessed emotions, but maybe it's not there to the level of like traumatic, it kind of comes in, maybe we feel like little excessively sad or angry, but it's not overwhelming, it doesn't flood us and hijack us. So when things had to get split further down that line, now they're coming in very intrusively. And so this is what PTSD is. It's really like a memory disorder. It's classified as an anxiety disorder, but it's really like memory based. So this part of the brain has no capacity whatsoever to distinguish between people, time, and place. This thing that got split off, anything that's even remotely associated with this, stuff that you would even believe, like that's associated with that, if a brain picks up on that and associates it, then it brings the whole event in through my body and the emotional centers of my brain, because that's where it's stored. Excuse me. So then when it comes flying in, people go into like high anxiety or panic or anger or dissociate and go numb or flat, or they use compulsive behaviors to regulate that whole thing, like substances, alcohol, food, sex, pornography, spending, whatever it may be, work, to try to keep all this stuff and regulate it over there. And so this is again what post-traumatic stress or PTSD is. It's like this intrusion of body sensations, feelings, dreams, images, memories that come intrusively against my will. Then you develop forms of chronic hypervigilance. And so that could be why you have the physical chronic anxiety, or when you get a panic attack, this is an intrusion of some trauma. In all my years as a therapist and working with countless people, I've never seen stress alone cause a panic attack. Stress can light the fuse, but it's bringing in something intrusively that's, like I said, that part of the brain is still locked in that time. And so it comes in through the body as if that moment were happening right now, even if it was 30, 40 years ago. It feels like now I could be 70 and this happened when I'm 8, and all of a sudden I feel what I felt in that moment when I was 8. And it overwhelms me again, either dissociates me or floods me with panic and anger. Like I said, talk therapy can't resolve that. And this is why so much of talk therapy has been ineffective, because for years we didn't fully understand the neurology of PTSD and trauma. And even to this day, like I said, it gets horribly misdiagnosed because, from what I've seen, the medical community is very similar, and definitely can attest to what's going on in the mental health community, is they're crazy about diagnosing symptoms and suppressing symptoms. And so you don't get resolution. It's like, okay, you have depression or you have anxiety, or I would tell you probably in my experience, like 90% of what's termed ADD is really forms of anxiety. So like, let's say if you're a child and you're around all this traumatic stuff and chaos and abuse, and you go to school and my brain is locked into this hypervigilance from all the trauma around me, it's gonna be really hard for me to pay attention, right? I can't focus on addition and, multiplication tables when I know I'm getting beat when I get home, or my dad's gonna come home drunk and beat my mom. It's really hard to pay attention and focus and be in a learning mode when I'm just chronically around all this. And so then I get diagnosed as having ADD, and I get put on a bunch of stimulants, and no one ever really finds out what's going on contextually in the environment that I live in. What's it like at home? Does this kid have addiction in the home? Is there violence in the neighborhood or in the area or within the home? What's the parenting environment like? Is there neglect, abandonment, or abuse? All these things. So there's not sufficient context given to the kid's symptoms. Or he's got all this like trauma inside him, and so he has explosive outbursts towards other kids. So then he's labeled as having oppositional defiant disorder. So now the kid's been traumatized. Now he's labeled as disordered, and then to give him a bunch of behavioral interventions trying to contain his anger and his outbursts, which does nothing to help heal the trauma that the kid's been through internally. It's just he's an angry kid or a bad kid, which is the biggest load of BS I've ever heard, and it just infuriates me, because then a lot of times that's the origin of the kid developing an addiction. Just put him all these meds, don't treat the trauma, label him, he's disordered, all this kind of stuff, learning disabled. When a lot of times, again, it's, if I'm getting beat and neglected every day, or there's violence around me, it's hard to be in a learning mode. My brain is going to wire to be in a constant state of protection around what's going on around me. And so another thing that gets misdiagnosed as a bipolar disorder, because when we split off in these parts that hold traumatic memories, when they come in intrusively, they make us seem very erratic, very moody, very all over the place. And it's like, well, and just like with the anxiety, often gets mislabeled as mania. Well, you're kind of manic today. Well, no, I've got like a high level of anxiety today that's making me be very elevated and move around and all this kind of stuff. And so, it's a nightmare trying to get a correct diagnosis of PTSD, because people in my shoes just think of it in terms of very specific manifestations. But the more you work with trauma, like as a trauma specialist, and you see the nuances of trauma, and you realize, well, okay, I can talk to somebody like in the first 90 seconds, and I can tell you they have PTSD. Just by their symptoms are telling me, and some of their history, the way they're presenting in front of me. And finally, and this is why they haven't been able to get better, they're hopeless, 20, 25 years in therapy, and they still have these symptoms. And so it's like, well, how is it, it's not possible to get better. I've been trying to get help for 25 years, no one's been able to help me. But once you understand like why, and I can communicate that to you, of why your talk therapy, why your medical interventions haven't resolved this. It's a neurological condition that is completely resolvable once you know how to work with the person's nervous system to help resolve that for them. So I know this is a complex topic, and I do this all the time, so I can get going really fast with it. So don't worry if you forget everything I just said or you don't understand it. I will make more videos, repeat everything I said in smaller detail. Send me comments down here about questions you have about what I'm talking about tonight, or maybe sharing your own parts of your experience you're comfortable with, or how I could help you in any way with where you get stuck with some of these symptoms. And like I said, the misdiagnosis is rampant. It's really a neurological condition. So you don't need to feel shame about it, like something's wrong with me, something wrong happened to me. And now I'm trying to navigate this like dysfunctional mental health system, trying to get adequate help. And, that's the purpose for doing these videos. So hopefully this makes sense to you, or you can send this to a friend or family member who struggles with this or has these conditions, because also it's very likely the person has substance abuse if they have a high level of trauma, or some compulsive behavior or addiction or something, because it's impossible to regulate all this internally. So I got to grab something outside myself to hang on to help me regulate all that stuff. And so then when you try to treat all these other conditions, but the underlying trauma isn't addressed, the person is just going to be forced to switch one addiction and one compulsive behavior to the other. So I stopped drinking, I gained 70 pounds. I get the bariatric surgery, I become an alcoholic. Right? I stopped watching pornography, I start doing cocaine. So it's going to whack-a-mole and move around. So this, I'm telling you, is the number one issue in most people's therapy, is various forms of trauma. And again, on a scale of 1 to 10, it doesn't have to be a 10 or a 9 or an 8. All along that scale is going to cause issues that drive the symptoms that you come in to see me for. So, really, the last thing I would say is, don't have a definition of trauma and feel like what I went through isn't significant, isn't enough to create these symptoms. Because of disassociation, you don't really realize how bad it was, how much it affected you, or you think in terms of somebody else's experience, where I wasn't raped, or I wasn't molested, I wasn't this. Well, yeah, a divorce can be even worse. A divorce for a child is a major trauma. You took my whole world, you flipped it upside down, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. And all the things that happen subsequently to the divorce, one after another, are layers and layers and layers of trauma. Because the number one thing that helps protect us and heal from trauma is secure attachment. So if my parents get divorced and one's gone and not there, the other one's overwhelmed emotionally or circumstantially, maybe they got to work 2-3 jobs now to survive. Now I've got all these emotions about what just happened. I don't have anyone really who can be there for me emotionally. And so that is just like, it doubles down on the impact that it has on me. And then it just goes on from there. And so there's a lot of things people don't realize, well, that's a trauma, or how that affected them, so don't sell yourself short from what you've been through, or compare yourself. Whatever you've been through was valid for you enough to create the symptoms that you come in to see me for. So that is all the information I have tonight on PTSD, and realize that maybe some of your other disorders are actually forms of PTSD. And I say forms because it doesn't all have to look the same. It presents in different ways. But anything that you have chronic, if you have chronic anxiety, chronic insomnia that's anxiety based, chronic physical symptoms that are connected to anxiety, are all forms of traumatic stress. And so until that's identified, you can't really get treated and resolved for it. But I'm telling you, the last thing is all of this is resolvable, and you can heal from anything you've been through. I've taken this, the worst possible things that can happen to a human being on this planet that you wouldn't even want to know about, and people have healed from them fully. And so you can heal just as easily as any of those. This force inside of us will help us recover and heal from anything. We just need the right help, the right relationships to help support us to get through that process. So enjoyed presenting all this to you guys tonight. Send me questions, send me comments, and I'll be back next Tuesday night at 7:15 to address more questions, provide more information for you guys. Always a pleasure. Please send this to anyone you feel could benefit. That's the whole purpose, is just trying to help people. That's what we're all about here. And have a great week. John H. at gatewaycounseling.com. Listen to the Key Podcast. Go to thekeypodcast.com for live streaming. Not live streaming, but streaming of that, our latest episode, and where we get more in depth into a lot of these issues. We're doing a 3-part series on shame right now, how to overcome shame, which is applicable to everybody. So I hope you listen to that and benefit from it. And again, subscribe to our channel here, and we'll just keep providing more and more stuff for you guys there. All right, have a great week. I'll see you guys next Tuesday night.